Ladies and gentlemen, the next segment is very important, very timely, and it's frankly the main reason I'm here is to have this important conversation. I'd like to now invite to the stage our Fire Chief and our Police Chief, Fire Chief Harry Beck and Mesa Police Chief John Meza. Gentlemen. Thank you, Chief. Thank you. Thank you very much. I recognize the tune. Name that tune. Layla. Oh, that's great. Gentlemen, now here's the deal. You guys both play guitar, right? And you're actually both very good, I've heard.
I don't know about that.
So, and not to let the cat out of the bag, but unfortunately, both of you guys are on the brink of retirement, right? So, you see these guys over here? There's life after retirement, right?
I don't think so.
So, Sally, can you book the, maybe first part of next year? Okay. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. And I don't mean to make light of this. This is a tough day for everyone in public safety. For those who might be watching this as a later date, we're filming this on the Friday, the 8th of July. Last night, we had a horrible national tragedy. 5 police officers were murdered. 5 others are critically wounded. And it's just part of a national problem that we're in the midst of. So let me begin just by expressing on behalf of everyone our support for public safety and for law enforcement. And I hope you know that you and those who serve with you are in our thoughts and prayers, and we appreciate the great service you provide our community. So like I say, we didn't certainly schedule this knowing that we'd be in the midst of this, but on the other hand, we've been in the midst of a challenging situation involving public safety for quite a long period of time. Chief Meza, why don't we start with you? Tell us, how are we doing as a community? Are we prepared to respond to similar situations that we've seen around the country here in our community?
You know, the answer, are we prepared? And that answer is yes. You know, it takes a well-trained police department to respond to these, and fire department, to respond to whether it's a natural disaster or it's an active shooter or some kind of critical incident. But it also takes the community end. And I've been with the police department for 30 years, so I've grown up in this community. And our community is really a culture of cooperation. And that really is the key. You need prepared public safety, but you need that support and cooperation from your community. And we have that. We have to continue to work hard at continuing those, you know, with the business community, with our neighborhoods, continue that cooperation, because you can lose that trust. You can lose that trust pretty quick. And it's just like a relationship. You got to work at it every single day to maintain that trust and that support. So, you know, let's just keep being Mesa and make sure that we in the public safety continues to be, you know, educated, trained with the right personnel, and continue to engage with our community.
Thank you. I'm not saying this because I work for the city of Mesa, but we are very fortunate. We're known nationally as having 2 very elite public safety departments with our police department and our fire department. Part of that is because they're very innovative. They do the most with the resources that we give them. Chief Beck, tell us a little bit about Mesa Fire and Medical and some of the innovative things that you're doing to be prepared, like Chief Meza has talked about.
Well, Mayor, I think probably foremost, in addition to what John has said, is that the 2 departments work together in the street together every day. And as a result of that, we have very strong working coordination so that we can maximize our response. That constant training that we do together, we operate in a unified command post. We have access to communication systems that can really bring resources in. So I think we're really well positioned to handle about any major incident that could occur here in Mesa. Well, some of the things that we've done in fire and medical here in the last little while that we've received quite a bit of recognition for, which we really just did to solve a problem, which is a continuing increase in our emergency medical calls. And what we were finding is that we could probably be much more efficient in the way we responded, although in the past we sent what we call an all-hazard unit, which is a 4-person fire apparatus that's capable of doing anything from a mountain rescue to putting a Band-Aid on a cut knee. And so we did that consciously. We wanted to have 100% coverage for all-hazard response, which we have a very good system in place. But now we added another layer that's much more efficient in terms of what we call low acuity patients, people that don't really have life-threatening situations but still have a need for some care. And so we've implemented a 2-person system. At this point, we're actually operating under a federal grant for the next year and a half. It was a $12.5 million grant for us to exercise the system that we've put together to model that as potentially something that could go forward in the future. But what it does is it really improves the patient care. Where rather than sending a behavioral health patient to the emergency room where they really don't have the capability to manage that, we actually send them to a psychological facility, maybe Community Bridges or one of the other facilities here in our city, so that they get better care quicker, much more efficiently, and they don't have to go to the emergency room, which, as you know, we always have trouble with backups and delays in emergency rooms.
That's great. These community care units that you've talked about, some of them are kind of responding to medical emergencies, and I know a couple of them are dedicated exclusively to mental health issues. And I was very surprised to hear a statistic recently. I think in an average year, or at least the last couple of years, your departments respond to about 2,500 different suicide call situations. That's a staggering number to me. If you think there's only 365 days in a year, and annually we're responding over 2,500 times to that scenario. What a challenging situation for your personnel to respond to. Chief Meza, I know recently you've talked about a crisis response team and how to be better prepared for those scenarios. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
You know, we did see over the last 2 years an increase in either suicide attempts or actual suicides. And what the police department needs to do is evolve with the trends that our community are seeing. So we went to City Council and requested resources for a 6-person crisis response team for the police department. And what that does is those are specially trained officers that really have more education than your average officer on how to deal with people with mental health issues and challenges. So far, we've been at it for about a month so far, and we've had some incredible results. We've had a couple of cases where I can't say for sure, but I'm pretty assured that had it not been for those specially trained officers that take more time to deal with these people, the results were, there was no tasers, there was no, use of force. They were able to talk their way through and get people help. And really, that's the change. Some of the reform you're seeing across the board in policing is slowing things down, taking more time to communicate rather than going to, using force from the get-go. So very fortunate that City Council approved that, and they're already at work and they're already showing results.
Mesa, I think we all think this is a great place to live, but this is a big city, as we know, 38th largest city in the country. We're part of a metropolitan area, several million people. So we experience all the challenges of the largest metropolitan areas in the country. And we're famous for growth, but we've been a little stagnant for a while, but we're back in high growth mode now as a community. I can tell you, Mesa is adding thousands and thousands of people every year to our community. That presents a challenge for public safety. How are we doing in terms of responding to the growth in our community? Are we well situated, or do we need to be mindful of that? Chief Beck.
Yes, Mayor. You said it, and we said it earlier, is that we're very well prepared to deal with the day-to-day demands of the city of Mesa in terms of all-hazard response. What we have seen over the last several years is an ongoing situation where our ability to really ramp up with resources for key major situations has become more and more challenging. And so what we're beginning to see is, even though our first line of response for a typical type of incident is still fairly stable with our response times, especially with some of the innovations, we've been able to keep our response times consistent over the years, even with about a 4 to 8% increase in call volume every year. So we've been able to really make some strides in that arena. But what we're finding is that, and in fact, you can see it anywhere really around the country where the community responds well to a major situation. It has to do with the depth that they have on the bench. Their first responders go like they always did. But how you actually manage a major situation, or even something that's just on the edge of being major, now it's still not major in terms of disaster, but say a mass casualty type incident or a large fire situation, you really do need to have some depth on the bench. And so that means you need to have the training, you have to have a few more people involved in it, and you have to have a plan in place to actually deploy those. And so we've been a little challenged in that arena. Some of the equipment is a little bit behind. We're actually operating with our fire trucks in a life cycle replacement that we're several years behind right now, so that presents a little bit of concern as well. But that's not to say that we're not ready to handle any emergency that comes along, but again, with the growth and the types of incidents, as John mentioned, the community is evolving and we're seeing different types of incidents, and we need to have the resources and the flexibility to be able to regroup and redeploy and be able to basically manage anything that can be thrown at us.
I think it was a month or so ago, both of you gentlemen were at the City Council. We were talking about your budgets, and there was a great graphic, Chief, that you put up that showed the response times in our city and how we do a good job, but in the high growth areas, particularly Southeast Mesa, where we don't have we have a lot of beautiful communities, beautiful houses, beautiful buildings. You got to kind of look for a fire station. We just haven't been able to keep up with the growth out there. But we are challenged, and more so with the growth in getting the response times that we want in those areas where we're growing quickly. Is that true for the police department as well, Chief Meza?
We have seen response times starting to increase. The growth out in the Southeast is definitely a concern. But what we're seeing also is the ability for the officers' time to be proactive. That's starting to decrease. And we look at response times, including other things, but really that proactive time, you don't want a police department that is just responsive and responding to calls. You want to have that time to be proactive, and that crime prevention piece is such an important part of keeping the community safe. So we're watching that also. When that starts to decrease, that means our officers are being stretched, just going call to call to call, and that's not being effective. So we presented that to council to talk about. We probably are going to need more resources to balance that out.
We need to hire more police officers.
Absolutely.
Okay, and they say we need to staff new fire stations, right, Chief?
That's correct, yes.
I mentioned earlier, both of you guys have had wonderful careers. We're very grateful for your service, and you're coming to the end of those careers. I know 30 some odd years, 40 some odd years. When you started in this game, and you were a rookie police officers, firefighters, and you rolled up to a situation, the equipment that you needed and that you were provided is different than it is now, right? We live in a more complicated world, a more dangerous world, I'm afraid. How have things changed in terms of how we need to equip our personnel?
I'll start off, you can jump in. That's probably been the biggest change. I mean, when I first started, you had one little portable radio and you stuck it in your car, and that was your radio in the car. Then when you got out for a call, you had to punch it out and put it on or take off running. And the computers, they didn't do a whole lot. So technology is probably the biggest change in law enforcement. The way we use the cameras, the tasers, the computer system, the intelligence sharing data. That is all critical. That is how we solve crimes and stuff that our crime lab does. But that's all technology, and that in the future of policing, technology is going to be a huge piece.
That's great. And unfortunately, that's expensive. So that's another thing. My role, or the role of city government, is to give you the resources that you need to be successful. And again, the events of the last few hours have demonstrated that you can't be too prepared for the situations that you're presented with. These are not hypothetical situations. Just in the time that I've been in my position, we've had flooding that lasted for several days. We had active shooter situations. Not too long ago, we had long-term power outages. Chief, what do we need? What kind of resources do you need to respond to those types of major incidents that have occurred and that we unfortunately know will continue to occur?
Well, that's a very good question. Obviously, we can't function on a day-to-day basis like we're going to have a major disaster any minute, because that just wouldn't be economical or wouldn't be feasible. But what we have to have is the ability to ramp up in those situations. And so as I mentioned earlier, our actual first response system is very efficient and very satisfactory. But what we really need is the ability to build in more training, which we've been deficient in recent years because of difficulties with funding some of the training that we need. Some of the equipment, as I mentioned before, is a little behind times. But what we really need is the ability to have information available to us quicker so we can do some advanced planning on incidents. But the other thing that's going on in our city right now is the call volume, as the mayor mentioned, is really increasing. And this last year it went to 8%, which was rather dramatic. And so, what we're seeing is that actually in West Mesa or the inner city of Mesa, the call volumes are really going up, while in the peripheral areas, because of sparse deployment model, is that the response times are getting longer. So we have this development where we have growth in terms of the expansion of the city that needs to be addressed, and then we have the call volume in the inside the city that depletes our resources on a pretty regular basis. And so what we really need is the ability to be more responsive to the individual demands during the day. One of the things that we've done with our new two-person units is actually do peak time deployment. So they're not a 24/7 unit. They're only working during the period of time where we have the data that demonstrates that the types of calls that they could be most useful on would be most prevalent. But the ability to sustain that is what's in front of us right now. And it's almost like you've probably overheard it, a bit of a crossroads where we're going to need to make some decisions about the quality of service that we're going to need to provide. And if we want to sustain what we have now, it's probably going to take some more investment.
Well, that's great, and I think the city government, city council is anxious to give you the funding you need to continue to accomplish your need, and we need community support to do that. You mentioned, what are some ways that folks at home or folks that just feel compelled to be engaged in assisting, what can they do to be of service to you?
Well, I think the community involvement is key. We have several opportunities that our community can get involved in. Number one, we have 11 forums. We have the business forum, we have clergy forum, Hispanic, African American, and we have human rights forum, and I can go on and on about the forums. I suggest that you go on to our website, the Mesa PD website, and we just published our annual report a while back. It has it has all the different forums that if you're interested, it has a lot of good information on the police department, some of the history, very well done. I encourage you to get on that. Each district, we have 4 districts throughout the city. Each district commander has an advisory board that any citizen or any business owner can get involved in if you live in that district. I encourage you to go on there and read that. If you want to contact your commander, there's all different ways to get involved. And we really take community involvement as an advisory role. We need to know what you need. We need to know the challenges so we can respond to that. So I encourage, and we have a great volunteer program. If you want to really get in, you can volunteer in our crime lab. You can volunteer in homicide at the districts. We have a very robust volunteer program.
Yes, you do. Chief Beck.
Yes, we have an emergency management division that the fire department's responsible for, that has what they call a community emergency response team program, which initially was federally funded, and there's just still a dribble of funding coming for. But what it basically does is it helps us organize neighborhoods to respond in support of public safety on a whole range of potential issues. And so that's something that's available. It's a volunteer basis. That's something that's available from the fire department. But I think something to consider is really 2 things. And it really doesn't matter what type of incident we're talking about here. But one of the things that people can do is is have a higher level of situational awareness, whether it be a flooding, whether it be your power is out, and so you think ahead, okay, what does this mean in terms if it doesn't come back on in a period of time? If we have evacuation, and in terms of what the community needs to be prepared for, is what we call a 72-hour kit, where you have 72 hours worth of your medication, clothing, water, maybe a little bit of food, kind of stashed in a particular place where if there's an emergency where you need to be out of your residence for at least 72 hours, you can pick up this package and you can go. In terms of businesses, I think it's the same thing. Each business to sit down with their employees and discuss the potential of what if we had a power outage here? How would we continue with our business? What would we do? Or if there was a flood? And these are two things that have occurred, as the mayor mentioned, right here. And the potential for all of those types of disasters that you see in the community are right here in Mesa as well. Remember, we're an extension of one of the most prolific metropolitan areas in the country. So Mesa isn't an island. Mesa is an extension of a much bigger metropolitan demand. And so anything that can happen in Phoenix or Chicago or LA or Orlando could eventually come to us. And so everybody should have higher level of situational awareness, have a little bit of a plan of how they're going to respond to that. And I think finally, especially whether it's a business or a home, is have a meeting place identified so that you can do, in the event of something terrible, you can actually do a roll call. Okay, one of the things that we deal with when we respond on emergencies is we really want to know what's the rescue problem, what's the rescue exposure for people in trouble. So if there's a place where we can go, where it's been prearranged, where people are going to come together, if they have to leave all at once, it's a way for us to be sure that we've got everybody taken care of. So those are just a few pointers.
Thank you, Chief. Those are all great. And unfortunately, those problems not only can happen, but we know they will happen in our community. It's just inevitable, unfortunately. So we appreciate all you do to prepare for that. I just want to underline something Chief Meza said. Both of your departments rely heavily on volunteers. I've gone to banquets and given awards to volunteers in the police, and it's a couple of thousand people, or at least 1,000, between all of the different activities that this very large, robust police department's engaged in. Some of it is really cool stuff. You talk about the crime scene, lab folks. A lot of those folks or some of them are volunteers, and it's very sophisticated, very interesting work. So if you're interested, have some time that you can dedicate to serving in public service, our public safety, we'd welcome those inquiries. We're going to wrap this up, but let me just again one more time say, on behalf of our community, how grateful we are to both of your departments for your great service, and to you two individually as you wrap up your service at the City of Mesa. Thank you for all that you've done for our community. Thank you very much. Thank you.